My name is Clarissa, 35 years old, and until last month, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 8 years with James, my college sweetheart. We had the dream home, successful careers, and what I believed was unshakable trust. When he suggested dinner at La Belle, that expensive restaurant downtown, something felt off. But nothing prepared me for what he said. He loved another woman. Instead of tears, I raised my glass and said, "To your freedom. You'll need it." The entire restaurant fell silent. Before I tell you what happened after the restaurant fell silent, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to reinvent yourself after betrayal. I met James during my final year at Columbia University. I was buried in law books at the library preparing for finals when he asked if the seat across from me was taken. I remember looking up into the warmest brown eyes I had ever seen. He was tall, with dark hair, always neatly styled, and a smile that made my heart skip. James was pursuing his MBA, brilliant and ambitious, with dreams of conquering Wall Street. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant where we talked until the staff started cleaning up around us. I learned he grew up in Connecticut, loved sailing, and could recite entire scenes from classic movies. I told him about growing up in Arizona, my passion for environmental law, and my collection of vintage vinyl records. James was different from other guys I dated. He remembered details about things I mentioned in passing. Once I casually mentioned loving peonies, and the next week, he surprised me with a bouquet. He sent me texts throughout the day, little jokes or photos that made me smile during stressful study sessions. After graduation, we both landed jobs in New York City. I joined a mid-sized law firm specializing in environmental cases, while James started at a prestigious financial company. We spent weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants, watching old movies in his tiny apartment. For 2 years, we built a life together, supporting each other through career challenges and celebrating small victories. James proposed in Paris. He had planned a surprise trip for our second anniversary. Under the Eiffel Tower, as lights twinkled across the city, he got down on one knee. The ring was perfect, a vintage setting with a diamond that caught every light. I cried so hard, I could barely say yes. Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of. A beautiful ceremony at a historic farmhouse upstate, with 200 guests, many who traveled across the country to be there. My father, who rarely shows emotion, cried as he walked me down the aisle. James looked at me like I was the only person in the world as we exchanged vows we had written ourselves. We danced until midnight under string lights, surrounded by everyone we loved. The first years of marriage were blissful. We bought a brownstone in Brooklyn and spent weekends renovating it together. James excelled at his job, quickly moving up the corporate ladder. I was making a name for myself in environmental law, working on cases I felt passionate about. We traveled whenever we could, backpacking through Europe one summer, exploring ancient cities and making memories. Everything changed when James was offered a significant promotion that required relocating to Boston. It was an opportunity too good to pass up. Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at just 30 years old. I gave up my position at the law firm, a case I had worked on for 18 months, and we moved. The plan was for me to find another firm in Boston after we settled in. I had always imagined having children by my early 30s, but James wanted to wait until his career was more established. I understood his reasoning. We would have more financial security, more time to spend with our children if we waited. So I agreed to postpone starting a family, another compromise for his career. Boston brought new challenges. James worked longer hours, often coming home after I was already asleep. His new position required frequent travel, sometimes weeks at a time. I struggled to find a position that matched what I had in New York. The legal community was tight-knit, and as a newcomer without connections, opportunities were limited. I took contract work reviewing environmental impact statements, but it was unfulfilling compared to the courtroom battles I loved. I threw myself into making our new house a home, joining community organizations, and building a social circle. Most weekends, I attended events alone, explaining that my husband was working or traveling. People stopped asking about him after a while. James came from a well-established Boston family. His mother, Sarah, never fully warmed to me. She had hoped James would marry someone from their social circle, perhaps the daughter of one of his father's colleagues. Sarah made subtle comments about my Arizona upbringing, my career choices, even my cooking. During holiday dinners, I often found myself alone in the kitchen, while she reminisced with James about family traditions I wasn't part of. His sister Ashley was different. 5 years younger than James, she welcomed me immediately. Ashley and I often met for coffee when James was traveling, and she became a true friend. She never made excuses for her brother's absence, but she filled some of the loneliness I felt in a new city. Looking back, I see the warning signs I chose to ignore. The decreasing frequency of our calls when he traveled. The way he would check his phone during our rare dinners together. How he stopped sharing details about his work, citing confidentiality when I asked questions. The distance that grew between us, both physical and emotional. I told myself it was just a phase, that all marriages have rough patches. I believed once he settled into the new position, things would return to normal. I convinced myself the hollow feeling in my stomach when he canceled plans at the last minute was just disappointment, not intuition, warning me something was wrong. The first unmistakable sign came about 6 months before that fateful dinner. James had always been open with his phone. We knew each other's passwords, not because we checked on each other, but because there was nothing to hide. Then one day, I noticed he had changed his passcode. When I mentioned it casually, he mumbled something about company security protocols requiring regular changes. His showering habits changed too. James had always showered in the mornings before work. Suddenly, he started showering immediately after coming home, regardless of the time. When I commented once, he said the gym at his office was being renovated, so he was using a public one that made him feel gross. One afternoon, while doing laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from a jewelry store I didn't recognize. It was for an expensive necklace purchased just before my birthday. But when my birthday came, he gave me a cookbook. I told myself he was planning a surprise for our anniversary, still 3 months away. Then came the company holiday party. James had mentioned a new team member who'd joined from their New York office. Maria Stevens, a brilliant financial analyst who had already impressed the senior partners. At the party, I finally met her. Maria was everything I felt I was not anymore. Confident in a way that comes from recent success. Stylish in her tailored black dress that highlighted her slim figure. Younger, maybe 27 to my 35. She spoke passionately about market trends and investment strategies, holding the attention of everyone around her, including my husband. It wasn't anything obvious. No inappropriate touches or secret glances I could point to. It was the energy between them, the way they finished each other's sentences referenced inside jokes from the office. The way James looked at her, the way he used to look at me, fully present and engaged. On the drive home, I asked about her casually. James spoke highly of her professional skills, but seemed too deliberate in keeping his comments work-related. Too careful. Too rehearsed. The next day, I called my best friend Lisa. We had met in law school and remained close despite the distance. I shared my suspicions, feeling silly even as I voiced them. Lisa listened without judgment, but suggested I should talk directly with James rather than letting my imagination run wild. I planned a special dinner that weekend, his favorite lasagna recipe from his grandmother. Bought new lingerie. Got my hair done. James called at 7 to say he needed to work late on a pressing deal. The lasagna dried out in the oven. The candles burned down. I fell asleep on the couch waiting. I tried everything to recapture his attention. Started running to get back to my college weight. Surprised him with tickets to a Patriots game. Sent flirty texts in the middle of his workday. His responses were polite but distant. The passion that once characterized our relationship had faded to cordial roommate interactions. The weekend trips increased. Client meetings in Chicago. Industry conferences in San Francisco. Team-building retreats at mountain resorts. I was invited to none of them, always with reasonable explanations about company policy or limited accommodations. One night, unable to sleep, I went downstairs for tea and heard James on the phone in his home office. The door was ajar, and his voice drifted out soft and intimate in a way it hadn't been with me in months. "I miss you too," he said. "Just a little longer, and we can figure this out." When I pushed the door open, he ended the call abruptly, claiming it was a colleague in the London office. At 2 a.m. on a Saturday. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but the knot in my stomach tightened. After that night, I could no longer ignore my suspicions. While James showered the next morning, I checked his phone. He had started using a messaging app I hadn't seen before. Most conversations were work-related, but there were numerous exchanges with Maria. They looked innocent enough at first glance, discussing reports and client meetings. But interspersed were messages arranging to meet for coffee, commenting on how nice it was to talk privately away from the office. One message from Maria read, "Last night was perfect. Still thinking about that view from the hotel window." James had replied, "The view inside was better. Counting hours until Friday." That message was sent during a weekend he told me he was at a financial conference in Chicago. I checked our shared credit card statement online and found charges from a Boston hotel just 20 minutes from our home. My hands shook as I replaced his phone exactly as I'd found it. In the bathroom, James whistled while he shaved, oblivious that my world was collapsing. I considered confronting him immediately, but realized I needed more information. If I was going to blow up my marriage, I wanted all the facts first. I contacted a private investigator, Martin, who specialized in infidelity cases. He was professional and compassionate, explaining the process without judgment. For the next week, Martin tracked James' movements. I lived in a state of numb anticipation, going through the motions of normal life while waiting for confirmation of my worst fears. Each time James' phone buzzed with a message, I wondered if it was her. Each late night at the office, I imagined them together. 7 days later, Martin sent me an encrypted email link. The photos were crisp and undeniable. James and Maria entering her apartment building, his hand on the small of her back. The two of them at an intimate restaurant across town, holding hands across the table. Kissing in his car in the parking garage of his office building. The final set was the most painful: James entering a real estate office with Maria, then touring a house in Cambridge. They looked excited, pointing at features of the home, standing close together as the realtor gestured around the property. I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. For hours, I couldn't move from the floor, alternating between sobbing and a terrible empty silence. I didn't eat for 2 days. Couldn't sleep for more than minutes at a time before jolting awake, my mind replaying those images. I blamed myself initially. Maybe if I hadn't given up my career to follow him to Boston. If I had pushed harder for the family he kept postponing. If I had lost those stubborn 10 pounds from our honeymoon. If I had been more understanding of his work pressures. I scrolled through old photos of us, searching for the moment when his smile toward me changed, when the light in his eyes dimmed. On the 3rd day, Ashley called, asking to meet for coffee. Her voice sounded strange, hesitant. At the cafe, she couldn't meet my eyes as she stirred her latte endlessly. "I need to tell you something," she finally said. "And I should have told you sooner, but James is my brother, and I was torn about where my loyalty should be." Ashley revealed she had known about the affair for months. James had confided in her shortly after it began, swearing her to secrecy while he figured out what he wanted. But last week, he told her he and Maria had put an offer on a house in Cambridge. They planned to move in together after he left me. "He said he was going to tell you soon," Ashley said, tears in her eyes. "But I couldn't let you be blindsided. You deserved to know before he emptied your accounts." That comment sent a chill through me. I hadn't even considered the financial implications. James handled most of our finances, an arrangement that made sense given his expertise. I had access to our joint checking account for household expenses, but he managed our investments, retirement accounts, and savings. I thanked Ashley for her loyalty, assuring her I didn't blame her for her brother's actions. That afternoon, I consulted with Thomas, a law school classmate who specialized in divorce cases. The consultation was both professional and heartbreaking, discussing the division of assets with someone who had attended my wedding. Thomas confirmed my fears about the financial vulnerability. In Massachusetts, assets acquired during marriage were subject to equitable distribution, but that didn't prevent a spouse from hiding or transferring funds before filing. He advised me to gather all financial records immediately and open separate accounts. That evening, I went through our home office while James worked late. I found statements showing significant transfers from our joint investment account to a new account in only James' name starting 3 months earlier. Nearly $400,000 had been moved, money we had saved together, including my retirement from my New York job that I had rolled over on his advice. I also discovered a copy of a mortgage pre-approval for the Cambridge house showing only James and Maria as applicants. The loan was for $1.2 million, with a down payment that almost exactly matched the amount he had transferred from our accounts. I could have confronted him that night when he came home, could have thrown those papers in his face, demanded explanations, cried and screamed, and broken things. Part of me wanted that catharsis, but another part, a stronger part, wanted something different. I wanted to face this betrayal on my terms, not as a victim caught unaware, but as a woman with her own plan. So I remained silent, kissed his cheek when he came home near midnight, and pretended everything was normal. Meanwhile, I began preparing for the conversation I knew was coming when he would finally tell me about her. The next morning, I called Lisa and asked her to meet me for lunch. Beyond being my closest friend, Lisa was a certified financial analyst. I needed professional advice as much as emotional support. Over salads we barely touched, I showed her the financial records I'd gathered. Lisa examined each document carefully, her expression darkening. "This is systematic," she said finally. "He's been planning this for months, moving assets incrementally to avoid raising flags. If you hadn't caught it now, you might have woken up one day to empty accounts and a note." Together, we developed a financial protection plan. First, I withdrew half of what remained in our joint checking and savings, depositing it into a new account at a different bank under only my name. Not enough to alert James, but enough to sustain me through the coming months. Lisa helped me document all the transfers James had made, creating a clear timeline of his financial infidelity. Next, I contacted my old law firm in New York. Though I had left on good terms, I worried they would have filled my position long ago. To my surprise, the senior partner welcomed my inquiry. An associate in the environmental division had just announced her pregnancy, and they needed someone who could step in without extensive training. The timing was perfect, almost cosmically so. I began discreetly preparing for a return to New York, researching apartments, reaching out to old contacts. Having concrete steps to take kept me from drowning in emotion. For my mental well-being, I joined a yoga studio near our home. The physical exertion and mindfulness practice gave me an outlet for the anger and grief threatening to consume me. During those classes, focusing only on my breath and movement, I found moments of peace in the chaos my life had become. After class one evening, a woman named Sophia introduced herself. She had noticed I often stayed behind, reluctant to return home. Over tea, I found myself confiding in this stranger. Sophia shared that she had survived a similar betrayal 3 years earlier. Her husband of 11 years had left her for his graduate student. "The worst part wasn't even the affair," she told me. "It was realizing my life had been built on lies, that while I was planning our future, he was planning his exit." Sophia invited me to join a support group for people dealing with infidelity. The group met weekly in a community center downtown, a diverse collection of men and women united by the common experience of betrayal. Listening to their stories, I realized I wasn't alone in my pain, nor in my determination to rebuild. 2 weeks into my preparation, James sent a text that made my heart race. "Can we have dinner tomorrow night, La Belle at 7, need to talk about something important." La Belle was where we had celebrated our 5th anniversary, an upscale French restaurant with private booths and discreet service. Perfect for intimate conversations or for ending an 8-year marriage. I agreed immediately, suspecting this would be the moment he finally told me about Maria. The timing aligned with what Ashley had revealed about the house purchase. The closing was likely approaching, forcing his hand. That night, I selected my outfit carefully. A navy blue dress James had always complimented elegant, but not desperate. I scheduled an appointment at a salon for the next day, determined to look my best when my world officially fell apart. I also called Lisa, asking her to be at La Belle during our dinner, sitting at a nearby table. I wanted a witness, someone who would remember how I handled myself at this pivotal moment. Someone who could testify to my dignity if my resolve faltered. The night before the dinner, I allowed myself one evening of mourning. I opened our wedding album, touching the photos of our beaming faces. I read the cards and love notes James had given me over the years. I cried for the future we had planned together, the children we would never have, the growing old side by side that would never happen. I gave myself permission to feel the full weight of the loss. But as the sun rose on the day of our dinner, I packed away those memories, both physically and emotionally. I placed our wedding album in a storage box in the attic, along with other mementos of our relationship. I took off my wedding ring, feeling the indentation it left on my finger after 8 years. And I prepared to face James not as a devastated wife, but as a woman reclaiming her power. La Belle was exactly as I remembered from our anniversary dinner 3 years earlier. Crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over white tablecloths. Fresh flowers on every table. A pianist playing softly in the corner. The maitre d' recognized us, greeting James by name and leading us to a secluded booth in the back. I noticed James had dressed carefully as well, wearing the charcoal suit I had helped him select for client meetings. His cologne, the one I had given him last Christmas, drifted across the table as he held my chair. These familiar details, once comforting, now felt like props in a performance of a marriage already dead. James ordered an expensive bottle of Bordeaux, the same wine we had shared on our honeymoon in France. His hands trembled slightly as he poured, splashing a few drops on the pristine tablecloth. A small imperfection in his carefully orchestrated evening. We engaged in awkward small talk through the appetizer course. He asked about a case I had mentioned weeks ago, though I knew he wasn't listening to my response. I inquired about his recent business trip, knowing he had actually been house hunting with Maria. We performed this charade of normalcy, both aware of the coming revelation, but approaching it from vastly different positions of knowledge. After the waiter cleared our main course plates, James cleared his throat. He reached across the table as if to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it, retreating to fidget with his water glass instead. "Clarissa," he began, his voice strained. "I need to tell you something difficult. I've been trying to find the right words for months." I watched his face, noticing how he couldn't quite meet my eyes. This man, who had once promised to love me forever, now could barely look at me as he prepared to break that promise. "There's no easy way to say this," he continued. "I've developed feelings for someone else, strong feelings that I didn't expect or look for, but that I can't deny anymore." I maintained a neutral expression, giving no indication that this revelation was anything but new. In the periphery of my vision, I saw Lisa at a nearby table pretending to read a menu while listening intently. "Her name is Maria," James said. "She's a colleague. It started as a professional relationship, but over time it became more. I never meant for it to happen, Clarissa. You have to believe that." He paused, perhaps expecting me to cry or demand details. When I remained silent, he seemed unsettled, forced to continue without the reaction he had anticipated. "We've been seeing each other for about 8 months now. I know that's a shock, and I'm so sorry for the deception, but I need you to understand that this isn't some meaningless fling. What Maria and I have is real. It's love, Clarissa. The kind of connection I haven't felt in a long time." His words stung despite my preparation. 8 months. While I was making dinner, waiting up late, worrying about his stress levels supporting his career, he had been building a relationship with another woman. 8 months of lies every time he kissed me goodbye, every time he said, "I love you," out of habit. I think we both know our marriage has changed. He continued gaining confidence as he moved into the script he had clearly rehearsed. We want different things. We've grown apart. You must have felt it too. I had felt it, of course, but not as a natural growing apart. Id felt it as his deliberate withdrawal, his increasing absence, his diverted attention. ID felt it as abandonment, not mutual distance. James took a deep breath. I've given this a lot of thought, and I think the best thing for both of us is to separate, to give each other the freedom to find happiness again. Then he moved into the financial details, the part I knew had been his primary concern all along. He suggested I keep our Boston house temporarily, while he would retain their investment portfolio. He glossed over specifics about retirement accounts and stocks vague on purpose. He mentioned a generous settlement that would take care of me while I got back on my feet. As he spoke, I observed him with a strange detachment, seeing not the man I had loved, but a stranger, using the language of care to disguise financial manipulation. He was offering me the facade of our life together, while preserving the substance for his future with Maria. When he finally finished, he looked at me expectantly, prepared for tears, anger, bargaining, perhaps even hysteria. Instead, I smiled slightly and raised my wine glass. To your freedom, James, I said clearly. You'll need it. The restaurant had grown quieter during his speech. Nearby diners, undoubtedly overhearing portions despite his lowered voice. At my toast, conversations at adjacent tables stopped entirely. Even the pianist paused, the final notes hanging in the air. James looked confused, then alarmed. Clarissa, I know this is difficult. It's okay to be upset. I maintained my composure, taking a deliberate sip of wine before responding. How long have you and Maria been looking at the house in Cambridge? I asked calmly. His face drained of color. What are you talking about? The $1.2 million Victorian. The one you were approved for a mortgage on 2 weeks ago. The down payment came from our joint investment account, didn't it? All those transfers over the past few months. James' mouth opened, but no words came out. From her table, Lisa didn't even pretend not to be watching now. I have to say the house is lovely, I continued. Great schools nearby, too, for when Maria has the baby she's been hoping for. She does want children right away, doesn't she? Funny how you always wanted to wait when it was with me. How did you... he began, then stopped, recalibrating. You've been spying on me? Checking my messages? Following me? I laughed softly. Does it matter? The point is, I know everything, James. About the affair, the house, the money you've been moving. I even have photos courtesy of the private investigator I hired. Very comprehensive surveillance package. I reached into my purse and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. Inside were copies of the financial records and a few select photos from the investigator's report. I especially like the ones of you two at the Charles Hotel, I said. Very romantic setting for a business lunch, wouldn't you say? James flipped through the contents, his expression shifting from shock to anger to fear. You had no right, he mumbled. No right. My voice remained steady, but carried enough to be heard at nearby tables. I had every right. I'm your wife, the person you promised to honor and cherish, the one who gave up her career to support yours, the one you've been lying to for 8 months while you planned your exit strategy. I leaned forward. But here's what you should know. While you've been sneaking around with Maria, I've been preparing too. I have copies of all our financial records. I've documented every transfer you've made. I've consulted with a very good divorce attorney. I removed a second envelope from my purse. This one contained divorce papers Thomas had prepared. These are fairly generous terms considering the circumstances, I explained. Equal division of all marital assets, including those you've attempted to hide. I get the New York apartment we still own and rent out. You keep the Boston house, and I expect half of your year-end bonus, which I know is coming next month. James looked stunned. You can't possibly expect me to sign these now. Of course not, I replied. Your attorney should review them first, but I wanted you to understand that your careful planning hasn't gone unnoticed, and it won't go uncontested. By now, the nearby diners had abandoned any pretense of not listening. I could feel their eyes on us, witnessing this public dismantling of a marriage. James leaned in, lowering his voice to an urgent whisper. Clarissa, please. We can discuss this privately. There's no need to create a scene. A scene? I kept my voice pleasant but clear. I'm not creating a scene, James. I'm simply responding to your proposal with one of my own. Isn't that what negotiations are all about? You've always said how important it is to negotiate from a position of strength. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This isn't fair. You're blindsiding me. The irony of his statement made me laugh genuinely. Blindsiding you, that's what you planned to do to me tonight. Tell me about your affair. Pressure me into an inequitable settlement while I'm in shock. Get me to agree to terms before I could think clearly. I stood up, placing my napkin beside my barely touched dessert. Your mistake was underestimating me. You forgot that before I was your wife, I was a pretty good lawyer, and that skills don't disappear just because they haven't been used for a while. I gathered my purse and the divorce papers, leaving the envelope with the evidence on the table. Keep those photos as a souvenir, I said. My attorney has the originals. Have yours call Thomas when you're ready to discuss terms. And James, don't try to move any more money. The accounts are being monitored now. As I walked away, James called after me. Clarissa, wait. We can work this out. Without turning, I replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. No, James, we really can't, but thank you for dinner. The wine really was excellent. I felt the eyes of every patron follow me as I walked toward the exit. Lisa rose from her table to join me, linking her arm through mine in a gesture of solidarity. Just before we reached the door, an older woman at a corner table raised her glass in my direction. Then another diner did the same, and another. I left La Belle that night not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. The weight of betrayal still sat heavily on my shoulders, but alongside it was something new, something powerful. The certainty that I would survive this, and that the story of my life was still mine to write. The aftermath of that dinner unfolded in ways I couldn't have fully anticipated. As I walked out of La Belle with my head held high, I had no idea of the chaos I had left in my wake, both public and private. James called incessantly that night, his messages evolving from angry accusations about humiliating him publicly to desperate pleas for a chance to explain. I silenced my phone and spent the night at Lisa's apartment drinking wine and allowing myself to feel the full range of emotions I'd suppressed during the confrontation. By morning, James' tone had changed again. His latest texts acknowledged his wrongdoing, begged forgiveness, insisted we could work things out. He claimed Maria meant nothing, that he'd made a terrible mistake. The house in Cambridge was just an investment property, he said, nothing to do with their relationship. I didn't respond. Instead, I met with the real estate agent who managed our New York apartment. The current tenant's lease was ending in 2 months, perfect timing for my planned return. The agent was discreet, asking no questions about my sudden interest in reclaiming the property. 3 days after the restaurant confrontation, Ashley called. She sounded shaken. Maria is pregnant, she blurted before I could even say hello. 3 months along. James just found out. The news hit me with unexpected force. While I had speculated about Mariah's desire for children in my confrontation with James, it had no idea she was already pregnant. 3 months meant the child had been conceived while James and I were still living as husband and wife, while he was still telling me he wasn't ready for fatherhood. How is he taking it? I asked, surprised by my own curiosity. He's a mess, Ashley admitted. He's caught between trying to win you back and dealing with Mariah's expectations. She thought he'd be thrilled about the baby, but his reaction apparently wasn't what she hoped. Now, she's threatening to tell everyone at his firm about how he handled the news. The situation was unraveling for James in every direction. His carefully constructed exit plan had collapsed, leaving him to face consequences from all sides. I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness for the innocent child who would be born into this tangled situation. Later that week, Sarah James' mother called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "How could you humiliate my son like that?" she demanded without preamble. "In public, in front of colleagues and friends, after everything he's done for you." I listened silently as she berated me, casting James as the victim of my vindictiveness rather than the architect of his own disgrace. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. "Sarah, your son has been having an affair for 8 months. He got his mistress pregnant while still married to me. He systematically transferred our joint assets to fund their new life together. If anyone's been humiliated, it's me. But unlike James, I chose to face reality openly rather than hide behind lies." I ended the call while she was still sputtering indignantly. It was the last conversation we ever had. With help from Lisa and Sophia, I secured a small but comfortable sublet in Boston while I finalized my plans to return to New York. I needed neutral territory somewhere without memories of James in every room. I packed only essentials, leaving behind the furniture and household items we'd acquired together. They were just things, and I wanted to start fresh. My old law firm confirmed my position, offering a salary even higher than I had before leaving. The managing partner mentioned that my handling of the Westlake environmental case had left a lasting impression, and they were eager to have me back. For the first time in years, I felt professionally valued in a way I hadn't in Boston. 2 weeks after La Belle, I met with James and our respective attorneys in Thomas' office. James looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his usually impeccable appearance noticeably disheveled. He kept trying to make eye contact across the conference table, sending me silent pleas I deliberately ignored. The meeting was tense but productive. James initially balked at the terms I'd proposed, particularly regarding his year-end bonus. Thomas calmly placed copies of the bank transfers and house purchase documents on the table. "We could, of course, take this before a judge," Thomas said mildly. "I'm sure the court would be interested in these financial maneuvers prior to separation." James' attorney, an elegant woman in her 50s, whispered something to him. After a moment, he nodded reluctantly. "I can agree to the property division," he conceded. "But I want it noted that I never intended to leave Clarissa without resources. I was planning a generous settlement." "How magnanimous," I commented dryly, my first words of the meeting. As we concluded, James asked if he could speak with me privately. Against Thomas' advice, I agreed to 5 minutes in a small meeting room. "Clarissa, I'm so sorry," he began once the door closed. "I never meant to hurt you like this. Things with Maria just happened, and then they spiraled out of control." "Things didn't just happen, James," I replied. "You made choices, repeatedly, for months." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I know, and I'm paying for those choices now. Maria is furious about how everything went down. The partners at work have heard rumors. Mom is devastated." "And you want my sympathy?" I asked incredulously. "No," he sighed. "I want another chance. We can work through this. Couples survive affairs all the time. What we had was real, Clarissa. 8 good years can't just vanish." I studied his face, searching for the man I had loved. "What about Maria? What about her baby? Your baby?" He looked away. "I would support them financially, of course, but that doesn't mean we can't try again. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." In that moment, I saw clearly what I hadn't before. James wasn't sorry he had betrayed me. He was sorry he had been caught, sorry his carefully constructed plans had collapsed. Sorry he now faced social and professional consequences. He wanted to retreat to the safety of our marriage until the scandal blew over. "No, James," I said quietly. "There is no trying again. You didn't make a mistake. You made thousands of small decisions that led to this moment. Every lie, every secret meeting, every dollar you transferred was a choice to betray me." I stood to leave. "I wish you well, I really do, but my future doesn't include you anymore." As news of our separation spread, I was surprised by how quickly it traveled through our social circle. Friends called to express support or curiosity depending on their relationship to us. Most sided with me once they learned the basic facts, though. A few mutual friends attempted to remain neutral, uncomfortable with choosing sides. At work, James faced unexpected fallout. A senior partner at his firm had been at LaBelle that night, witnessing our confrontation. The affair itself might have been overlooked in the finance world, but James' handling of company finances came under new scrutiny. The firm had strict policies about personal financial ethics, viewing them as indicative of professional trustworthiness. His anticipated promotion was quietly put on hold. Through it all, I maintained my focus on rebuilding. During the day, I prepared for my return to New York, wrapping up loose ends in Boston. Evenings were spent with my support group or yoga classes, finding community in places I had neglected during my marriage. And sometimes, alone in my sublet apartment, I still cried. Not for James, but for the future I had imagined for the children we never had, for the years I had invested in a relationship built on shifting sand. I allowed myself these moments of grief, recognizing them as necessary steps toward healing. One rainy Tuesday, I walked into my usual coffee shop and froze. Maria was sitting alone by the window, absently rubbing her slightly rounded belly as she stared into her cup. For a moment, I considered leaving before she noticed me. Then she looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. Neither of us spoke as I ordered my coffee. The barista, sensing the tension, prepared my drink with unusual speed. As I turned to leave, Maria called my name. "Clarissa, please, just for a minute." Against my better judgment, I approached her table. Up close, she looked as tired as James, had her perfect makeup not quite concealing the strain in her face. "I didn't know you came here," she said awkwardly. "I've been coming for months," I replied. "Long before I knew about you." She flinched slightly at my directness. "I suppose you hate me." I considered this as I sat down across from her. "I did at first, but the truth is, James is the one who made vows to me, not you." Maria traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "He lied to me too, you know. Told me you two were already separated, just keeping it quiet until some deal at work closed. By the time I learned the truth, I was already in love with him." I thought about the photos the investigator had shown me, the clear timeline of their relationship. "When did you find out he was lying?" "About 2 months ago," she admitted. "I saw a family photo on his phone lock screen. You were both at some party, arms around each other." I remembered the image. James' sister's graduation dinner just 3 months earlier. We had looked happy, the perfect couple. "So you knew he was still with me but continued the relationship?" I kept my voice neutral, genuinely curious about her perspective. "He promised he was going to tell you," she said defensively. "That he was just waiting for the right time. And then I found out about the baby." Her voice trailed off as she placed a protective hand on her stomach. Looking at her, I felt an unexpected wave of pity. Maria was younger than me, clearly intelligent and accomplished, but she had fallen for the same charming version of James that I once had. She was starting her journey with him where mine was ending, carrying his child while dealing with the wreckage of his lies. "Can I give you some advice?" I asked. She looked surprised, but nodded. "Get everything in writing. Child support, custody arrangements, financial commitments, everything. Don't trust promises or trust funds that might materialize later. And remember that someone who lies to their spouse will likely lie to you too." I stood to leave, having said more than I intended. "I am sorry," Maria said softly. For whatever that's worth. I looked at her one last time. Take care of that baby. They deserve better than the circumstances of their beginning. As I walked out into the rain, I realized something important. The anger that had fueled me through the confrontation at La Belle was beginning to dissipate, leaving room for something more complex, but ultimately more healing. I wasn't responsible for James' choices or for the consequences he now faced. I could release that burden and focus solely on rebuilding my own life. In my therapy sessions, I began exploring patterns I'd fallen into during my marriage, how I'd gradually minimized my own needs accommodating James' priorities until they became the center of our shared existence, how I'd ignored red flags, choosing willful blindness over uncomfortable confrontation. These were hard truths to acknowledge but necessary for ensuring I didn't repeat the same mistakes. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what was done to you, my therapist explained during one particularly difficult session. It's about freeing yourself from the ongoing pain of it. You can forgive James without ever trusting him again. Slowly, I began to understand that while James' betrayal had broken my heart, it didn't define me. I was more than a woman who had been cheated on. I was a talented lawyer, a loyal friend, a person capable of starting over. The end of my marriage was just one chapter in a much longer story, a story that was still being written. 1 year after that fateful dinner at La Belle, I stood at the window of my New York apartment, watching snow fall softly on the city streets. The past 12 months had brought changes I could never have imagined on that night when I raised my glass to James' freedom and unknowingly to my own. My return to environmental law had been more successful than I dared hope. Within 6 months, I was assigned lead counsel on a major case against a chemical company polluting a river system upstate. The case garnered national attention, positioning me for a partnership track I had once abandoned for James' career. Thomas called it poetic justice when he heard the news. You gave up your ambitions for him, and now you're soaring while he scrambles to rebuild, he noted during one of our occasional lunch meetings when he visited New York. Through Thomas, I learned that James had indeed faced professional consequences. The firm had conducted a review of his client accounts after questions arose about his personal financial ethics. While no improprieties were found, the scrutiny had damaged his reputation. He remained employed, but was passed over for the director position he'd been groomed for. My personal life had evolved as well. The support group I'd joined in Boston had inspired me to start a similar circle in New York, gathering twice monthly in my apartment. Women and a few men who had experienced betrayal came together to share stories, offer advice, and witness each other's healing journeys. Lisa had moved to New York as well, accepting a position at a financial consulting firm 3 blocks from my office. We often met for lunch or after-work drinks, our friendship strengthening through the transition. She had been my rock during the darkest days, and now she was my cheerleader as I rebuilt. Sophia and I maintained our connection through weekly video calls. She had become an unexpected constant in my life, someone who understood the specific pain of marital betrayal, without the complicated history that came with longer friendships. Perhaps, most surprisingly, Ashley and I had preserved our relationship. Despite initial awkwardness, we had established new boundaries that allowed our friendship to continue independently of her brother. She visited New York quarterly for her company's regional meetings, and we always made time for dinner. James and Maria got married last month, she mentioned during her most recent visit. Small ceremony at City Hall. The baby is cute, a little girl named Lily, but things aren't going well between them. I wasn't surprised. Their relationship had begun in deception and continued through chaos. According to Ashley, the reality of parenthood had hit James hard. Sleepless nights and constant responsibility contrasted sharply with the exciting affair he'd enjoyed with Maria. The house in Cambridge, purchased at the peak of their infatuation, had become a financial strain as legal fees from our divorce depleted his reserves. Maria expected the glamorous life of a director's wife, Ashley explained. Instead, she's stuck at home with a colicky baby while James works late trying to rebuild his reputation. They're both miserable. I felt no schadenfreude at this news. Their unhappiness brought me no joy, just as their potential happiness would bring me no pain. I had reached a place where James' life was simply no longer my concern. One rainy Sunday, I received an unexpected text from James. "I know I have no right to contact you, but I need to say again how sorry I am for everything. The life I thought I wanted has turned out to be nothing like I imagined. I miss who we were together. I miss you." I read the message twice before deleting it without response. There was a time when such words would have shaken me to my core. Now they were just words from someone who no longer held power over my happiness. That same week, I donated my wedding dress to a charity supporting women rebuilding after divorce. I had kept it in storage, unable to decide what to do with this beautiful gown that represented both joy and pain. The diamond engagement ring James had placed on my finger under the Eiffel Tower found a new purpose too sold to fund a scholarship for a law student interested in environmental justice. These symbolic acts marked not bitterness, but closure. With each item from my past that I repurposed, I reclaimed a piece of my narrative. In April, I finally took the trip to Italy I'd always dreamed of. James had repeatedly postponed this vacation during our marriage, always finding reasons why the timing wasn't right. I spent 3 glorious weeks exploring Rome, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast, traveling at my own pace, following my own interests. In a small cafe in Rome, I struck up a conversation with Michael, an American architect working on a restoration project. We shared an afternoon exploring hidden corners of the city, his professional knowledge adding depth to sites I'd only read about. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and refreshingly direct. When we exchanged contact information before parting, there was no pressure, just the pleasant acknowledgement of a connection worth preserving. Back in New York, Michael and I maintained casual communication. He returned to the States 2 months after our meeting, and we met for coffee when his work brought him to New York. Our friendship developed naturally, without the intense chemistry that had characterized my early relationship with James, but with something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. "I'm not ready for anything serious," I told him honestly after our 3rd dinner together. "The past year has been about rebuilding myself, not finding someone new." "I respect that," he replied. "And to be honest, I'm enjoying getting to know you without expectations. Let's just see where this goes." This measured approach was new territory for me. With James, everything had been whirlwind romance and passionate commitment. Michael and I were building something different, a connection based on who we were now, not who we hoped the other would become. As winter settled over the city again, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The woman who had raised that glass at La Belle seemed both intimately familiar and a stranger. She had been fueled by shock and anger, determined to show strength when she felt most broken. The woman I had become still carried scars from that betrayal, but they no longer defined her. I had learned that healing isn't linear. Some days still brought unexpected tears or flashes of anger. But those moments no longer derailed me. They were just weather patterns in a much larger emotional landscape that included joy, peace, pride, and hope. Perhaps the most profound change was in my relationship with myself. I no longer measured my worth through someone else's eyes or validation. The voice in my head had transformed from critic to ally, acknowledging my strength in surviving what once seemed unsurvivable. I no longer harbored anger toward James or Maria. Their choices had caused me immense pain, but they had also ultimately freed me from a marriage that had already been hollowing out from within. In a strange way, their betrayal had forced me to reclaim parts of myself I had slowly surrendered during our years together. As I watched the snow transform the city into something magical, my phone buzzed with a message from my publisher. The memoir I'd begun writing 6 months earlier, chronicling my journey from betrayal to rebuilding, had received an offer. They believed my story would resonate with countless others who had faced similar crossroads. I typed a quick acceptance, smiling at how life continues to surprise us with its possibilities. The pain that once threatened to define me had become a story I could tell from a place of strength, perhaps helping others find their way through their own darkness. Sometimes the most beautiful sunrises come after the darkest nights. The toast that night wasn't just to James' freedom, it was to mine. Freedom to reinvent myself. Freedom to dream new dreams. Freedom to write the next chapters of my life with my own hand. Have you ever had to completely reinvent yourself after a major life upheaval? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal. Remember, the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another. Thank you for listening, and may you find strength in your own journeys of transformation.